Now we're going to continue on with the neck construction. So the next step is we're going to cut the fret slots for our fret blank. So I've got this fret blank. It is sized to about a 1/4 inch over length and width, and the height is at 9/32 right now. Gives me a little bit of play when I go to do the radiusing. So I am using one of the StewMac templates to cut my, to guide my cuts. Basically, it's just got a bunch of little notches on each side for different scale lengths. We want the 34-inch scale length. So I actually have it taped to the opposite side so that this doesn't bump into the guide pin. We're going to use just a bog standard crosscut sled here. I've got a little piece of MDF with the pins glued into a slot here so that I can put the pin in the guide here. In here is a blade for cutting the frets slots. I have done these by hand. It's not too bad with walnut. Maple's even tolerable, but ebony is just, it's brutal. It's really hard, it's oily, and so it gums up the blade really, really quick. It's an exercise in torture. So moving to a powered setup to do this has been like one of the best things I ever did. The only thing you really do have to watch for is because ebony gums up the blade so bad, you have to clean that blade between every use. I just use Green Clean or Clean Green, something like that. And the sappy stuff comes right off of it. So the first thing we're going to do is, I've got it up here, so it's just going to cut a shallow slot, and then I'm going to work up to where I want my slot depth to be and use the calipers to verify that I've got it everything. And then once I've got that down, I'll shoot through all the slots. Down here at the end, I do have a piece of tape that marks off, here's the last slot that I want to cut. These templates do support a 24 fret board, but I'm only going to 22. All right, so all our frets are cut. Now that we've got all those done and at the right height, I will go back and crank this up a little bit. Not quite enough to cut all the way through. I'll do the last bit by hand, but just enough to sort of, save my arm a little bit of trouble, because that's where our nut's going to be. Now, last thing we'll do is try and capture some of this dust. Occasionally you'll have the need to do a little bit of fill work, and some nice dust mixed with some super glue makes a great fill. Especially with ebony where it gets nice and dark, so it kind of blends in really well. You've got tear out, something like that, and you need to patch a hole. The other ugly thing about ebony dust is, oh my God, it gets in everything. So you got to make sure you clean up really good when you're done. And as usual, we've got our template taped to our fretboard, and we will cut it on the bandsaw roughly and then clean it up on the router table. So probably ought to figure out a reliable way of doing this all in one cut, so I don't have to sort of glue it up, each individually size the neck and the fretboard, but for now this is the technique. And after doing that on the bandsaw, I am reminded exactly why I do this in 2 steps. Sometimes you mess up the fretboard, and if you mess up the fretboard, you don't want to have it already glued to the neck. So I try and build it all in 2 steps. This isn't messed up, but it's some curly ebony, and it just chips like crazy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it very easy on the router table, like, you know, maybe a 1/16 or so on each cut, just to try and make sure that this stuff does not snap apart on me. May not be super visible on camera in this light, but I did end up with some chip out here. So coming around that corner, popped a little bit out of there. I do believe that this will actually be taken off by the radius, so I'm not too worried about it. If it does, if it is a little bit there, still there, then a little bit of fill will probably be completely invisible. And now we have our fretboard cut to size. Here I've got the dry fit, just making sure everything is going to go as I intend it to. Basically, I've got a couple of cauls that are going to run the length of the fretboard, clamps on each end, and then down through the middle to kind of keep things tight. I've gone through and sort of looked at the seam to make sure that I've got no gaps when I do this. You know, in any places that indicate that maybe the truss rod or the carbon fiber is sticking up too high, and so the fretboard won't clamp down nice and flat. Don't see any evidence of that. So now I'll disassemble this, and then we'll go for the real glue up. What I try and do, or what I did during this, is I did a couple clamps sort of at the end to get things centered and aligned. Sometimes I'll use like a bit of a straight edge to help me guide things, but honestly, your fingers are generally more precise. I mean, you know, you can feel there's like, I've got the difference between the widths split fairly evenly and then lined up here at the end. And let's do it. So now we're going to do the glue up. Got a little bit of tape here just to keep the glue out of the truss rod channel. I know I said that before and then glued it up, but this time I swear I will get it off of there before I do the glue up. One last wipe to sort of make sure I don't have any material or, you know, dust on any of the surfaces. Got a little scraper ready to go. You know what I want to do? Let's mark our end here so you don't get too much glue where the nut's going to be. Alright, so now we have a nice line there. That's as far as we want to go on the glue. Paper towel for emergencies. Look for any dry spots, make sure we get good coverage. We'll get a little bit of that squinge out of there. Off with our tape. Now this blue plastic wrap here actually keeps the truss rod from getting all munged up with the glue anyway, so the tape is kind of not 100% needed. Now I have tried various techniques that I have seen online about, put a pin in this, use salt. Oh, that was a terrible idea. That did not help to align the joint or keep it from moving at all. All that did was just keep the joint from being tight. Let's see. Probably, you know, if I had a CNC, the pin thing might work pretty good, but I do not. All right, so we are fairly flush there. Now, we are centered well. We'll put our first caul in place. Sometimes just a gentle squeeze will get it tight enough until we can apply some balance. Come on, let go. All right, so we're still in good shape here. That feels pretty good. That feels pretty good. Okay, so we're in place nice. Now we just get everything nice and snug, and then check our seams. Our seams seem nice and good. So now we just leave it alone for a little while. I will come back in probably about 10 minutes just to scrape away and squeeze out that that goes better if you let it dry just a little bit, and then it becomes, you're knocking off like a bubble of glue versus wiping it into the grain. All right, now we'll take a couple minutes to talk about how I do radiusing on my fretboards. Base neck is going to get a 9.5 inch radius. I've got it double stick taped to the center of this track, and I have a sled that can ride up and down the track. Now, the sled is built with a whole lot of high school trig, basically set up so that if I got my router in here, as I work my way down, when I get to a 1/4 inch height on the fretboard, I have a 9.5 inch radius. So this slides back and forth and gives me my radius. Now I will slowly work my way down. I don't want to take off a whole lot. Once again, this curly ebony is super chippy, so I want to take it easy and not push it too hard. Don't want to give it any excuse to tear out. Once I'm down to about a 64th to where I want to be ultimately, I have a second sled that's just got a radiused sanding block on it. I will use sticky back sandpaper and work my way up to 320 grit doing that. And then finally just do it a quick hand sand down to 600. I think I've mentioned before how ebony dust gets everywhere. So it's starting to coat the burl here, and while it's not driving into the grain yet, I'm just gonna play it safe. Cover that headstock with some tape just in case. I don't really want to discolor that by dust getting trapped in some nook or cranny. The other thing you may notice is I always push with the sled. So we don't want to rock this because we may dig into the fretboard. If we push the sled, this stays nice and flat. I probably need to work up some sort of dust collection that actually just pulls from here. Sometimes I will try and hold the vacuum hose right here to catch a little bit more of that, and that helps, but then I lose a little bit more control on the sled, so generally I kind of lean towards just clean up the mess afterwards. I do have a radius gauge here so I can check my progress. Anyways, back to it. I'm dropping about a 1/28 on every pass. Once again, this stuff is super brittle, so I wanna definitely sneak up on it and not cause myself any problems. So we're at the right height now, but what I want to do is I'm going to run back and forth across it a little more time just to make sure I'm not really like segmented, that I've got a smoother curve. And then I will swap out to using the sanding block sled. We still have just a little bit of the chip out that happened on the router table. I suspect once we get through the sanding and take off that last 64th, we'll probably be in pretty good shape. All right, we're gonna start with 120, and then we'll work our way up till we get to 320. Do like to flip around every now and then, change direction, just in case I am, leaning one way or another, or there is some sort of imbalance. The flipping around should help keep it even. Try and push on the center. Every now and then, vacuum off the excess so we don't get too gunked up. If you do start getting sticky spots on the sandpaper, one of these, you can buy these rubber blocks for cleaning sandpaper. It takes that stuff right off. So you don't end up creating, grind spots where you've got stuff stuck in the sandpaper. What you'll see as you get, closer to being done is that the entire swath of the sandpaper will get filled with dust on each pass. Like right now we can see that we're not generating any dust here on the edges, so we need to keep going at it until we've got everything even. Now if I take my radius on here, I can still, that's actually much better than it was last time I checked. We're not actually sanding on this spot yet, and it was showing a little bit of gap of light, but now it's not really showing any gap. I'm still not really getting a sanding along this, so it's not quite perfect, but we're getting close. It's moving out towards the edge with each pass. All right, I think I'm getting it. We'll just put a little bit of chalk pencil there just to make sure that we're actually wiping that off. That's looking pretty good. We'll just put that there in case we need it for later. And we will move up to 220. So one of the reasons I did this whole track and shuttle kind of strategy is I used to just run the radius block down, but then you twist and you roll, you don't have a lot of control. This makes sure that you never pivot like this, and it's kind of resting. As long as you've got sort of even pressure, you're also not going to roll because you just can't. So you end up with a whole lot nicer radius. I did forget to mention earlier that if you were doing inlays or anything like that, you know, like if you were doing fret dots, you probably would have done them before the routing. I tend not to put fret dots on the front of my necks. Generally, like at some point you're not really looking at them as a player. You might reference the side dots occasionally if you get lost on the fretboard. As an instructor, you might want that on the front so people can see where you're playing. But as a player, I don't think you really need them. Oh, and our chip is in good shape too. Ebony is nice and oily, very easy to gum up the sandpaper. And then when you gum up the sandpaper, you start leaving gouges where you've got debris on your sandpaper. Just keep your sandpaper clean. And finally, I think I've got sort of, you know, the streaks that it's generating now are from this sandpaper, so I'll do the last bit by hand, just 600 grit. 600 grit, you're not going to actually change the radius in any meaningful way. We don't have any more lines across. So the next thing we're going to do, and I kind of just talked about this in my 5 things that went, you know, my retrospective on serial number 22, is I like to put some oil on the neck before I actually fret it up. So the finish will help protect it when I tape it up. You know, when I start polishing the frets and things like that, it'll keep it from sticking to that. So I do like to finish my fretboard while I got full access to it. Now, this stuff's really oily. So what we're gonna do first is we're gonna wipe it down with acetone and get it nice and clean, try and get the surface oil off of it before I hit it with some tung oil. And just to show how ebony gets in everything, like your hands will get stained. So, you know, clean it before you touch anything. All right, cleaned the fretboard with some acetone. So it is nice and dry. It doesn't have any surface oil or dirt on it. Some well shaken Wacko tung oil. Some folks will tell you that you don't need to oil something like ebony, which is already fairly oily. And perhaps that's true. I do like it myself on my builds. It makes things easier later down the line. When I have to tape up the fretboard, I don't get stuff stuck to it. It's easy to buff and make it look good. I don't put a really thick coat on, just a couple coats. Let it dry, you know, a day between each coat. Makes me happy. Anyways, this is the kind of content that you like. Please like, subscribe, comment below, you know the drill, and we'll see you at the next one.